Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next event of Cybiant, in which we are going to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics these days, and that is agentic automation. Thanks for taking the time to be with us for the next 45 minutes, in which I'm going to take you on a walkthrough through some of the latest and new cool features in the domain of automation, and during which you will have the opportunity to ask questions and see how some of these new technologies work. Before we get started, let me do a very brief introduction. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I'm the director at Cybiant, which is a company that specializes in automation solutions and technology. Over the years, I've worked on many different automation projects, and I've been involved in a lot of content development, both from an educational perspective as well as industry developments. Most notably, I've wrote the service automation framework, which is one of the drivers for using automation solutions in any large organization. At the bottom of this slide, you can find my contact details, and we will be able to share the slide with you afterwards. So if you want to get in touch after today's session, by all means, always feel free to send me an email. Good. Before we get started, just one brief slide around the logistics of this session. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive access to the full recording after the session has finished. We will also make a copy of all of the slides available to everyone who's attending, so there's no need to make screenshots during the session, because we will make sure that you will get the original copies of all of the things I'll be sharing today. Besides that, I'd strongly like to encourage you to ask questions. In the Teams interface at the top of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. I would kindly like to request you to use this feature so that we can collect all the questions at the same time, and instead of using the chat, because then I would need to keep monitoring that on the site. The Q&A panel also allows other people to upvote specific questions, so that makes it easy to prioritize the questions that are most relevant for everyone who's joining today. And last but not least, note that the slides are always shared. We always try to send a copy of the deck within the next business day, so you can expect a full copy of the slides within 24 hours. So now that we have the logistics out of the way, let me get started with giving you a bit of an overview of what we are going to discuss today. First and foremost, I'm going to start with setting the context a little bit and discuss the evolution of robotic process automation to the use of agentic automation that we're doing today. And I'm going to show you that with some very simple examples of where RPA worked very well, but also where it starts to hit its limits. Then afterwards, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the technology concept of agentic automation. Many of you will have heard about agentic AI and agentic solutions in the last years. It's a term that's been highly popularized, but I'm going to make sure that you also understand what is actually happening underneath the hood. So we're going to dive a little bit into the technology and showcase how this fundamentally changes the way in which workflow execution actually works. Then in part number 3, I'm going to dive into different levels of agentic automation and focus more on the practical examples. So many, from my conversations, I know that many organizations are on their journey to start working with agentic AI, but it's a little bit too much to think that you could change your organization in one big shift. So I'm going to show you a 3-step approach towards getting more and more work done by autonomous agents in your organization, and how you can make this very practical and pragmatic. Then afterwards, we will have a very short example, and I'm going to show you 2 specific case studies on what can be done and some examples of how this would work in practice. And then we will end with some governance and security considerations before diving into the Q&A. So I've tried to include some knowledge, some content sharing, but also keep the session today very, very pragmatic and practical, where we will dive into what actually works in real organizations and what makes it actually very practical. Good. Let's start diving into this right away. Now, for many, many years, and those who have joined previous sessions will probably know this, I have been a strong advocate for automation solutions, the automation of individual services, and moving towards an era where mundane and repetitive work is done in an automated way through automated solutions. And one of the most interesting things that we accomplished all of those different years is that we taught all of the robots what the work is that they needed to do. So for many, many years, automation followed the rules. And when I say they follow the rules, I'd like you to take that very, very literally. What we have done in the design and solutioning of RPA processes is that we establish rule-based automation. And that means that we have set the steps and activities that every robot would need to complete. I'm going to show you that with some examples in a second. But the main thing I'd like you to realize and in today's sessions is that the rules have quite literally changed, because with the use of AI agents and AI capabilities, technologies, and the algorithms that are behind it, we are no longer bound by any rules. And what that means from an automation perspective is that you don't hit the limits that exist in rule-based automation. As many of you will know who have a programming or an IT background, is that if you develop and design workflows, you run all kinds of different tests, but there might be situations that a robot is unable to handle. That's where you literally get towards the bounds of rules. And if you push that over, it literally means that you will get errors and that there will be different issues with your robots going on. With AI, that is no longer the case, and that completely changes the way in which robots and workflows can be developed, but also the number of use cases for which these solutions can actually be utilized. And that is what makes it very, very interesting. Now, why is it then time to move and transition towards agentic automation? So many organizations have implemented, have utilized RPA and automation workflows for many, many years. But if you look at the top 3 issues that you will run into with RPA solutions, I always like to summarize it into a top 3. And the first and most important aspect, that if you develop automations and automated robots, ultimately, for more complex use cases, and there is always a level and use case that is even more complex. And for simple and stable processes, RPA solutions are wonderful and they work all of the time. But most organizations, once they have embarked on their simple processes, would like to start doing things that are significantly more complex. And as organizations grow and more processes, integrations happen, workflows tend to become more complex over time, and that as a result will always mean that your workflows also will become more complex over time. And that can lead to very high levels of specialization, only a few people who know how those specific robots have been programmed, and needing to test and retest all of those solutions periodically. Secondly, and inherently related to that complexity, is that if you design rule-based systems, they would need to be frequently updated. Many of you who have been using AI or RPA solutions know that if interfaces change, then you need to update your workflows. If there's new versions or solutions being published, there's a high chance that you would need to update your robots and your workflows. And as a result, the teams that originally spent their focus on building the automations now need to spend a significant amount of time doing maintenance, updates, and making sure that the robots keep running and the workflows keep running in the way that they were originally designed to do so. And those two combined means that if you're using RPA at scale, and with scale, I mean within a complex enterprise organizations with many different departments, dozens or sometimes even hundreds of different robots running, then at a certain moment, you are hitting a ceiling. And that ceiling of business rules is either coming from complexity or it's coming from the requirements to do maintenance and updates. And in many cases, from my experience, it's also coming from the lack of knowledge and keeping up to date with all of the new features that these agents and tools are bringing. So this is the business reason why it is useful to start considering agentic automation, because this is where a fundamental shift takes place. And let me explain that a little bit more in detail. Why do I say that you will hit the ceiling at a specific moment in time? It's basically because of 4 critical characteristics. First and foremost, I already briefly explained it, RPA workflows are deterministic by design. And that means that if you start a workflow with a particular input, you will always, in 100% of the times, receive the same output. So RPA robots work by executing predefined steps, and as soon as you deviate from those predefined steps, it's going to result into errors or failed workflows. Secondly, it means that there's a high maintenance burden. I also briefly discussed this on the previous slide. Robots require maintenance, and if you have dozens or hundreds of robots running, the amount of hours that you need to spend to maintain and keep everything up and running is quite significant. And because technology changes all of the time, this is not going to stop anytime soon. You will need to keep updating your systems and workflows. And the more robots you have running, the higher that burden actually is. Thirdly, and this is another key consideration, is that traditional RPA robots are very much focused around volume processing, meaning that there is a standardized process that works all of the time, but the input is very predictable. And what that means is that those robots are not very good at dealing with variability. So as soon as there is an unknown use case, there is something that does not 100% fit the predefined pattern, then in many of those cases, the robot is unable to make a decision on what to do. And as a result, the workflow will either fail or you get an output that the robot should not create. So it's going to deliver the wrong kinds of results. And although processing for volume is very nice, in a lots of organizations there's a lot of variability, there's a lot of different use cases with which you would like to take into consideration. And that basically leads towards the last point, is because RPA robots are running and doing work in a predefined manner. It's fair to say that RPA robots are execution agents, robots that do very simple kind of decision making through if-else analysis, but they don't think the way that a human would, and they don't execute work in a smart or intelligent way. Even though we've been talking about intelligent automation and intelligent robots for many years, inherently it is an execution engine. And if it's not programmed into the workflow, the robot will not know what it needs to do. So enter the agentic era. And the way I always like to explain the work and the difference between RPA and agents is very well reflected into the way that our actual brain works. So I always like to call this the brain analogy. On this slide, you see a depiction of the human brain taken from the front side. And as many of you will know, your brain is separated into two halves, a right side and a left side. And based on years of research, I'm obviously not a doctor, so don't ask detailed questions around the way that the brain actually works. But you have a side which is focused around what we call the analytical part. And this is the right side for your brain if you stand in front of it. And this has everything to do with logic. This is the part that allows you to reason, to reach specific conclusions. This is the part that you're using when you're solving equations or when you're thinking and doing mathematics. So it's what we call the analytical side of the human thinking. And throughout the years, based on all kinds of neural programs, they found that by putting people under the scanners, they found that if you are doing this kind of sequential logical reasoning, you're using this part of your brain. However, the other side of your brain is focused around what we call the feelings, the elements that allow you to think outside of the box, the areas that are responsible for your creative side. So if you are making a painting or you're coming up with a creative design, then you're actually using the left side of your brain. And this is the part that's responsible for intuition, feelings, the part that you're using when you're doing arts and crafts, emotions, music. That's the other side. So very briefly put, you can separate the human brain into this element that is responsible for reasoning, and you can divide it in a part that is responsible for the feeling aspects. And this analogy works fairly well for the change that is happening right now, moving from the RPA domain towards the agentic domain. And if you, in order to finish that comparison, the analysis part that we have been using in RPA for many, many years is very similar to the way that robots work. Robots analyze, they follow specific logic, they follow business rules, and they will reason and follow the exact steps that they are programmed to do. The other side of it, however, is what we call the agentic side. And this is the area that would fairly well compare itself to what an AI agent does. It's able to deduce things. It's able to make intuitive decisions. It's able to use creativity. And obviously, these are the elements that are powered by AI algorithms underneath that allow it to think outside the traditional rule-based engine that we've been seeing in RPA. So I always like to start with that, because if you remember this analogy, then it becomes quite easy to see what is going to be different in changing from a more process-oriented RPA solution towards really an agentic solution within your organization. So take this into mind while we go through the different areas and while I explain the theory of using agents a little bit more in detail. So the shift that we're trying to accomplish as part of the move towards agentic automation is to allow workflows to use a little bit more of their imagination and to let them think and execute more like a human brain. I'm obviously not saying that it's similar to human decision making, but there is a fundamental shift in the sense that these AI agents are very well able to understand what the end goal is that they would need to deliver, and that as a result, they are not just following rule-based instructions, but that they focus around the outcome that would need to be achieved. And this is a very critical distinction in the way that it reasons and the way that it's executed. Now, this is backed up by a lot of research and a lot of facts that have been analyzed by many different studies and many different researchers. The move towards agentic AI is backed up by a massive industry that is growing bigger every day. A market for agentic automation solutions is massive. The RPA market was 4.7 billion in 2024 alone, and the agentic market is expected to double within the next few years. However, in those different workflows and in the development of those different pilots, we generally see that there is a lot of excitement upfront, and the first projects take shape and are being developed. But then all of those aspects that I talked about earlier, like complexity and maintenance, start to kick in, and the program then stops or doesn't come to full fruition. And in many cases, that is caused by the fact that during the life cycle, the robots break or they stop functioning or some of the underlying systems change. And therefore, we are encountered again with those maintenance costs and the need to constantly keep those robots up to date. So even though there's nothing wrong and this is an excellent technology and has been for many years, the complexity that we are experiencing in these kinds of situations generally leads towards situations where there is a need to think for the next stage. And that's exactly what agentic AI is going to bring. So I hope that sets the scene a little bit in terms of what is expected and what we're trying to accomplish. The next part of my session, I'm going to talk a little bit around then the how. So assuming that you already have some knowledge around the way that traditional bots work, how can you move towards more of agentic automation in your own organization? And the way that I like to explain that is by looking at a step-by-step kind of approach. In order to move towards a truly agentic way of workflow execution, organizations generally go through 3 phases. And you can kind of see what is happening with the dots on the screen. Is on the left-hand side, we have the traditional rule-based engine. And in that rule-based engine, you see that there is actions. We can have if-else statements. We can guide the robots through different areas, but the result will be that the outcome is always deterministic. It's always rule-based. Now, one of the first steps that organizations take when they move towards the agentic era is that they start to enable AI components into their workflow. And that's what you can see in the second graph in the middle. This is where workflows start to contain AI steps or AI actions. One of the most common examples is the use of OCR scanners or machine learning technology, where based on a specific AI component, a workflow is becoming more complex and is able to achieve more compared to the traditional rule-based engine. Now, take into account that although this situation in the middle is very much more advanced than the first one, and again, most organizations have not even gone to this level yet, the outcome here is always still deterministic, meaning that if I start with a particular input, I will always get the exact same output. So even though it's significantly more smart, the main thing about AI-driven automation is just there are just some AI components within that workflow that will lead towards the same deterministic output. Input in means the same output out. Now, the last situation and the change that I'm explaining in today's session is what we refer to as the AI agent, and that is agentic automation. And what happens in this third and last area, the area that we are in today, is that the AI agent is actually making decisions based on input what specific path to take. So it can go towards a specific AI action. It can also run a traditional activity or workflow engine, or it can even go back and request for more information. So that's what the arrows back actually represent. So it's a different setup, it's a different structure, and also means that there's a different way of developing an agentic automation versus the first two aspects, which are more of a similar development approach. Let me explain these three a little bit more in detail, and also show you some examples. So I'm going to very briefly run through the RPA part, because I'm assuming most of you who are joining today will already have some kind of sense of this. The RPA robot follows explicit predefined rules, and that means that there are business rules that you design in a workflow, and the robot will follow specific actions one after the other, exactly the way that you've defined it. And that's what we mean with the rule-based part. If there's any escalation, it will automatically go to a human, and there is absolutely no memory or learning across all of the different runs. It will just repeat the same thing over and over again. So in terms of use cases, think for processing specific Excel sheets, think about moving data from one system towards another. These are, I would say, the very useful but very basic kinds of RPA workflows. And the input will always lead towards a specific output. Now, a much more interesting development, and this is what we've been seeing in the last 1 to 2 years, and many organizations are still busy with this, is where you are including AI components into the workflow. And this enhances the capability of workflows very, very significantly, because those individual activities have much broader capabilities. So 2 examples I've listed here on the slide are, for instance, OCR scanners, which extract information from documentation, or, for instance, a simple machine learning algorithm that makes a particular prediction on specific inputs. And what these AI functions do is that they significantly enhance the quality of the workflow and the complexity of the workflow as well. However, some of the constraints that we've seen with RPA still apply here. It's still deterministic. There's only one right way to extract information from a document, for instance. There's only one right way to apply a machine learning algorithm to process a specific amount of data. So even though the functionality is much more advanced, there is always still a predetermined output. Other examples in this domain are, for instance, automated language translation, translation of documents, the analysis of images or pictures. All of this, these kind of more advanced workflows are very useful, but they are still using AI as a single component within the larger ecosystem. One of the common use cases here is the document processing. Think about invoice automation, or think about processing information from ICs or pictures. Those are very common use cases that utilize AI-driven automation. Now, the change that is fundamentally shifting is agentic automation. And what is different in agentic automation is that there is an AI component into your workflow, which is represented by the purple box you see here in the center. And that AI agent is going to rationalize and determine the best possible decisions based on the input. However, the number of inputs, actions that you can give to the agent are virtually limitless. And there is no specific element or specific level that says that this is the only areas that you can do. A good example to illustrate this is what is done with, for instance, KYC processes, which stands for Know Your Customer. If a bank or financial institution or any kind of organization that needs to do verification runs a Know Your Customer process, the requester can come from all different kinds of people. It can be a student, it can be somebody that works, it can be somebody that's retired, it can be in any age range, can be male, female, can be any type of job scope. So if we would need to program that into a rule-based engine, then there would be dozens, if not hundreds, of different decision points. Now, an AI agent is not going to do that. An AI agent is going to consider any individual, and based on their key properties, is going to make a decision which particular action to take. And what that means is that exception handling and the step-by-step rule-based approach is no longer necessary. An agent adapts based when conditions change. And for instance, if we would like to process a different type of individual, for instance, with a job scope that we've never had before, the AI agent will still run that, whereas a traditional RPA robot will fill. And the fact that it's able to handle those exceptions autonomously also ensures that that maintenance that we talked about earlier is not so important, because the robot, the agent in this case, is able to deal with that kind of exception management. So these are the three different areas and the three different steps that I'd like you to really take away from the session. Starting with the traditional rule-based approach, then moving towards AI-driven automation, and then finally towards the agentic agents. And I'd like you to really see and understand what are the differences between those three different steps, so that you can make more informed decisions on when you would need which one in which particular situation. So to summarize why agentic AI and agentic automation solutions are the next wave, or significantly more smart and able to deal with complexity, is because they are built for variability. In the early days, we focused mostly around volume, because the robot needs to do the work in the same way every time. But the benefit of using an AI agent is that that input can change. And if that input changes, it does not mean that the workflow will break. The system is able to adjust to that. It's able to perceive, reason, act, and subsequently adapt. And this is because we are using the power of AI algorithms that are underneath it. And that makes it a significantly different solution than what we've been seeing before in the traditional workflow approaches. So I hope that clarified a little bit the technology underneath the hood and the differences between the three different streams. By now you might say, well, that all sounds very nice, but how can I do this, and how can I start using those AI agents within my organization in a way that we also are in control of what the AI agents are doing, and that we fully understand the consequences of embedding those agents into our workflows. As I mentioned in the beginning, I've been involved in many different implementations of agentic AI, and I've been in automation for close to 15 years. So what I strongly advise organizations is to take a phased approach and basically move through agentic automation in three different steps. The first step would be what we like to refer to as assisted autonomy. And that basically means is that humans will work together with the AI agents, and the AI agent assists a person with making suggestions, summaries, recommendations. So a good example here would be the drafting of specific documents, processing a specific input email or specific work order or invoice. And this is where a human is sitting behind a interface, in most cases kind of like a chat GPT prompt kind of level interface, where they can upload documents. Those documents are automatically processed. You can click certain actions in which certain workflows will run automatically. We call that assisted autonomy because the AI agent here functions as an assistant. It functions very similarly towards the way that Siri and Alexa and all of those other voice agents also work. It won't do anything unless you instruct it to do so. And the human is still the first point that will actually do this. The second level, as soon as you're comfortable with this step, and again, I fully realize that this is already kind of a leap to for some organizations. The second step is to move towards supervised autonomy. And this means that the AI agent is going to execute different steps, typically independently, and not always within the supervision of a individual. So for instance, this is a situation where a robot or agent will, for instance, process incoming questions. Or for instance, where a AI agent will deal with every new order that is being received or every new email that is being received. We call this supervised autonomy because the robot will execute work based on a specific trigger. It will make the best possible decision out of all of the options that it has available. But there's still this human review and there's still human decision making in the loop, hence the word supervision. And then level 3 in the agentic journey is to move towards full autonomous systems, where the AI agent autonomously deals with work without any human input anymore. So minimal human oversight, and the agent is acting as if it was a human employee of the organization. Now, why am I showing you this today? Once you get started on the agentic AI journey, my strong recommendation to all of you who are listening today is start with assisted autonomy. Get first other people on board with this concept, showcase that the human is still involved, that it is still the person that will do the click or instruct the robot to run a specific process. Once you start with assisted autonomy, the acceptance in your organization is going to gradually increase, and people will start to see the value of working together with agents, noting that it's not going to take over their jobs and that there is a hybrid way in which just productivity can go up very, very significantly. I've also seen situations where companies immediately move towards a full autonomous agent, but that generally leads towards a lot more discussion, a lot more problems. Not so much from a technology side, but generally more from a cultural and from a people side. So this is why I wanted to share this with you today, because based on all the project that we are doing, I would strongly advise you to consider this more stage or phased approach when moving towards agentic automation. So in order to kind of understand for yourself where you sit today, think about it this way. I've listed 3 questions here on the slide, and based on that, you can basically determine for yourself where you are. First question is, does your automation bots require frequent human interventions when conditions change? If the answer still is yes, then you're generally at the assisted autonomy level. If it's more occasional, you're at level 2, and if it's rarely and there's no human involvement anymore, then you're at full autonomy. Same is true for governance questions and understanding how much control you still need to have around those agents, as well as where do your highest value processes sit on a complexity scale. If it's high volume, low variability, as we've seen, then you're still very much suitable for assisted autonomy, whereas with high complexity and a high number of different use cases, you're moving towards a more fully autonomous situation. So just a very simple slide and a quick assessment for yourself to see where you sit today. Now, I also promised you that I would show you some very simple demos. So what I've prepared for you today is a very simple example of what would be assisted autonomy. And what you see happening on the screen is that a human would get an interface, and just like what you would have in ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or whatever LLM you're using, And very similar to the way that you chat against a chatbot or an AI agent, what you see happening on the screen right here is that a human, in this case, would do supplier onboarding. And in this first step, you see that a person uploads a particular contract. And based on that contract, the information is extracted, what you see right happening over here. And that information from that contract is then automatically put into, in this case, a CRM record. So from the document, it automatically processes that information. It puts that information into a system, and then the robot validates and reviews the contract, and then ultimately uploads a copy of that contract into the system itself. Now, in the old days, obviously, this would be a manual step. So people copy pasted all of the fields into a CRM record, and they manually uploaded the document, which would generally probably take 10 times as much time as what the agent is doing right here. Now, this is a good example of what we call limited agentic AI solutions. It means that it's assisted, you are still in control, but it's already a completely different experience, and it increases the productivity significantly. I've literally seen many organizations where, let's say, a person is able to do, let's say, 10 documents per hour. By using these kinds of solutions, it moves towards 100 documents per hour. So the productivity increase with these kinds of solutions, even though they're very, very simple, is already very, very significant. So that's why I wanted to show this. Another good example that I'd like to show is to think about existing robots and existing workflows that you might have in place, and thinking about how you could transition that towards an agentic version. And this is more for organizations that already have some workflows and where you still already have some RPA in place. And a good example here would be the processing vendor invoices use case, which many organizations are using already, where a robot already reviews and processes through OCR, scanning, matching with a PO, or even with a three-way matching. And the robots are very, very capable of doing this. However, if a particular business rule is being broken, like for instance, there's a dispute, or there is an error in the workflow, or the PO doesn't match, or there is a difference in the order amount and the PO amount, what happens in these more traditional RPA workflows is that the case is automatically escalated towards a human. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, because this is the way that many organizations work today. But this is where the AI agents can start to take in, because if let's say that this is an invoice is escalated to a person in the finance department, might be the case that that person is just on their break, or in another meeting, or doing something else. And that's when the queues start to pile up. And if we think about what I've just been explaining in the last 30 minutes, this would be where AI agents start to get in. Because with AI agents, for instance, the agents could be used to do dispute investigation. It could look in other systems around why there's a mismatch. It can come towards a particular conclusion, why something is different from the original order. And based upon that, it can make a decision. And it will make decisions based on whatever dispute there is, based on a different amount in the invoice, based on a different PO number. And it can reason why that's the case and what's the best course of action. Same is then true for dispute resolution. What we can do is say, well, if it's most likely just a typo, send the invoice back to the vendor, or say that there's an issue and they would need to review it, or that they need to put the PO on the invoice. All these kinds of outcomes are you are able to design. So what the agents are doing in this particular use case is really taking over that exception handling approach that was traditionally done by a person, and that can now be done by an agent. And obviously this agent will do that instantly. There's no wait times, there's no coffee breaks, there's no other doing things after a specific meeting. So I think that these are very good use cases, and I've tried to kind of keep things very practical for today, so that you can start thinking about where am I today, and what are the kind of processes that I'm already running, and what could I then do to improve that or to move it towards a more agentic version using the exact same process and the exact same types of workflows. So I hope that is a useful overview. Now, I'd like to finish this webinar with the eternal governance discussion, because one of the most commonly heard arguments against AI agents is obviously the governance aspect. Being able to still control what an agent does, which kinds of decisions it makes, and also control what the outputs can and cannot be. So one of the main messages that I would like to share with you at the end of this session is, once you make the move towards AI agents, you need to do governance by design, not while you're developing it, but upfront. Think about key questions that determine whether your organization is able to accept and work with the autonomy that AI agents bring. I've listed some key, I would say, advice elements here on the slide, and I'll just run through them very briefly. But the first and most important part is to define the scope of autonomy. So to what level can AI agents operate independently, and what is the type of information they're able to process without human involvement? The other key best practice in setting up a good governance framework is to ensure that there's human overrides at every level, so that there's always a way in which a human being can immediately shut the robot down and take over whenever necessary. Additionally, it's important that audit trails are always there and that they are non-negotiable. Don't use credentials from actual people, but set up specific robot credentials, for example. And very similarly to what I've explained before with the 3 different levels and the 3 different steps, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you is start small and then scale it over time. Get people on board with the idea of agentic automation and agentic working, typically together with people. And as soon as that success has been proven, then it's possible to scale. Think about an agent in your organization as just another coworker, somebody that can make mistakes, but that in that case, need to be corrected. You need to train them. You need to ensure that they understand what the work is that they need to be done. There need to be safeguards in place so that just like a human cannot take over an entire system, or should not be able to take over an entire system, an agent also should not have those capabilities. And last but not least, you should obviously always check your legal requirements for this particular country that you're in, and match that with the governance requirements that requires for AI agents. Different countries have different rules and regulations around this, and as many of you know, in Europe, there are some more strict rules about that, especially when it comes towards data processing part, and there are key considerations that you need to take, especially when you process confidential or private information, especially if you let that be done by robots. So do governance right from the beginning, and if you do that, I can promise you that you have a perfect establishment for starting a journey towards agentic automation. So my last slide before I move to a bit of the Q&A, what I'd like you to think about is, what does agentic AI mean and agentic automation mean, and what can it potentially mean for my organization? Think about your current processes. Think about your current RPA processes. What are the ones you already have in place, and what are the ones that you might want to enhance towards an agentic solution? Think about whether you're ready in terms of people, in terms of your technology, in terms of acceptance and business case to make the next step, and that is to move towards a first pilot project. Once people start to see agentic agents with their own eyes and start to see an interface where they can just simply upload, let's say, a contract as we've just seen, or a document, and automatically all of the information is extracted and processed within a few seconds. That's really when people start to see the value of these kinds of solutions and wanting to do more. And as soon as you've done that, as a last start, think about what is necessary and see if you are able to build or establish a first few AI agents by yourself. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for spending some time with us today. Before we move towards the questions, I'd like to offer you a free white paper, which is around 30 pages, which outlines most of the materials that I've explained to you today. It's obviously completely free of charge. So I've written a white paper which is called Getting Started with Agentic Automation in the Enterprise, and will give you step-by-step do's and don'ts, practical guidelines, and practical steps on what you should take into consideration when working with agentic AI or agentic automation in your organization. So the QR code is on the screen. So if you're joining by phone, you can do this. Again, you will get a full copy of the deck a little bit later. So you can always also download this a little bit later. And with that, I'd like to open up the floor and cover a few questions to see if there's any clarification or that anybody's looking for, or that would like to see a little bit more of a specific question in this particular case. Let me open up the Q&A. Good. I see a first question coming in, and that is, what technology would you recommend to start with? It's actually quite an interesting part. I always try to refrain from going a little bit too much into the technology discussion around, this platform is better than another. Obviously, you need to choose a platform that is able to support AI agents. And obviously, there are better ones and there are ones that are more in early stages. So it needs to be a platform that is able to facilitate that. On the other hand, I also would advise you to think about the governance requirements. And the last slide that I just mentioned with auditing capabilities, security controls, the way to orchestrate and the way in which you can control all of the agents that are running. I think that those are the key decision factors that you should look at. Also think obviously about the size of your organization. There are very premium tools. However, there are also many, I would say, mid-size kind of technologies available. So depending on where you are and how large your organization is, I would recommend to make a decision based on that. Good. Let me go to a next question from Dowdy, requesting to share the presentation. Yes, of course, we will send the presentation a little bit later. Another question that just came in is, how would you get your team on board, since it might take away jobs and work? Well, this is I would say, one of the most common discussion points. What I would really like to recommend is start with that assisted agentic automation. And so that level 1 example that I shared with you earlier. Why? Because in those use cases, there is still a human in the loop. And it shows that the AI agent is not completely taking over the job of an individual, but that it's an assisted approach. And already by using assisted agentic automation, you can get towards, let's say, a times 10 or 10x productivity gain. Work that used to be done by a single person and would take them, let's say, 5 minutes per process, can now be done in a few seconds. So already with that, even if you don't want to kind of get reduce jobs or change scope, you can ensure that you create a situation where one person is able to do so much more compared to just doing things alone. So I think that is it in terms of the questions. I also think that we're getting a little bit towards the end of the time. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention today. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day to be with us. I hope you found this useful. And if you have any follow-up questions or would like to discuss a specific use case, I've shared my information at the start of today's session. So always feel free to reach out and discuss any automation challenge you might have. Thanks for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you in any of our upcoming sessions and events. Have a nice day.